Greetings, I'm Dev the Developer. This video answers a question you might already be asking. What actually are HTML and CSS, and what are they for? Before we write a single line of code, I want to give you a frame for understanding why these tools exist. Let's talk about what you can build with HTML and CSS. The intro you just watched, the animated text, the motion, the color, that is HTML and CSS. Not a video file, not a design program, HTML markup and CSS styling rendered in a browser. If you inspect that page, you'll find SVG elements nested inside HTML styled with CSS rules. That's the whole intro. Speaking of which, I have a watermark that's supposed to be that one. So that watermark is also just SVGs inside of an HTML page, animated and colored with CSS. The point is, HTML and CSS aren't just for web pages in the abstract sense. They're rendering the things you're looking at right now. Websites are obviously built with HTML and CSS, but some of the applications you use every day are also running on HTML and CSS under the hood. In fact, Visual Studio Code, the editor we use in this class, is an Electron app. Electron lets developers build desktop apps using the same tools as the web. So when you're in Visual Studio Code, you're already inside HTML and CSS. So let's back up and think about why HTML exists at all. When computers started connecting to each other, clients sending a request to servers, servers sending data back, someone had to decide how that data would be presented, not just transmitted. Presented, structured, made readable. And it had to work the same way regardless of whether the person on the other end was running Windows, a Mac, a phone, or something else entirely. HTML is the answer to that problem. Hypertext markup language. It defines the structure of a document. What's a heading? What's a paragraph? Where does an image go? What links to what? The browser reads that structure and builds the page from it. When you post something on social media, your browser sends that post across the internet to a server. That server saves it to a database, then sends back a response. And that response includes HTML. Your browser reads the HTML and renders what you see on the screen. Sometimes that HTML is just a file sitting on a disk, loaded and sent as is. That's a static website. Sometimes the server builds HTML dynamically, pulling in data from the database and assembling the page before sending it. And in the most complex cases, HTML is modified live in the browser by JavaScript, updating the page without ever reloading it. That is how single-page web applications, or SPAs, work. Here's how I think about HTML. Imagine a building under construction. The steel frame before anything else is added. The frame defines where the floors go, where the walls will be, and how tall each level is. It's structural. Nothing about it is decorative. But nothing else can happen without it. HTML is that frame. It defines the structure of the web page, where the heading goes, where the paragraphs are, where the image is set. On its own, it's plain, functional, and unstyled. But it's the foundation that everything else is built on. And here's something worth knowing early. HTML has no logic, no conditions, no loops, no decisions. It doesn't do anything. It just describes. The browser reads the description and builds what HTML tells it to build. Once you have a structure, CSS is what makes it look like something. CSS is cascading style sheets. It takes the HTML elements, those headings, paragraphs, images, and tells the browser how to display them. Colors, fonts, spacing, layouts, sizes. CSS is why one website looks completely different from another, even if they're built from the same HTML. CSS works through rules. A rule targets one or more HTML elements and specifies how they should appear. You can write those rules directly inside your HTML, but more commonly, they live in a separate file. That separation is intentional. It keeps your structure and your style from getting tangled together. CSS is how websites adapt to different screen sizes. The same page can look one way on a desktop monitor and a different way on a phone. That's how CSS works. It can change what gets shown, how things stack, and what size things are based on the device that's reading it. Now, I want to be direct about something because it catches a lot of people off guard. Writing HTML and CSS is not programming. This is not a programming class. HTML and CSS have no real logic. You can't write a condition, you can't loop through data, you can't make decisions. What you can do is describe structure and style it. That's real and valuable work, but it's closer to design than to programming. If you want to make a web page respond to user input, update without reloading, or do anything that involves computation, that's JavaScript. JavaScript is a programming language and it's not what we're covering here. What we are covering here is the foundation. You cannot build anything on the web without understanding it. Now, if this isn't completely making sense, don't worry. Once you start actually using HTML and CSS, you'll have a better understanding of how all this works. Let's just jump straight into the next video where we'll actually start using it. And when we get there, don't just watch it, do it.